The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, Colorado, as townspeople emerged from their homes with a hunger for justice. The autumn air of 1887 carried the scent of fallen leaves and smoke from the blacksmith's forge, but today it would also carry the weight of judgment. Sarah Mitchell stood on the wooden platform in the town square, her hands bound behind her back with coarse rope. Her dark auburn hair hung in disheveled waves around her pale face, and the simple blue calico dress she wore was wrinkled from her weeks in the cramped jail cell above Murphy's General Store. "She's got the devil's own composure," muttered Mrs. Abernathy to her neighbor. "Look at her standing there like she ain't about to meet her maker." Sarah's green eyes scanned the growing crowd, searching desperately for even one sympathetic face among the hardened expressions. Children perched on their fathers' shoulders while women clutched their shawls tighter, whispering prayers of protection from evil. Sheriff Tom Bradley climbed the steps to the platform, his boots creating a hollow echo. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," he began, his voice carrying across the square, "you have been found guilty of the willful murder of Thomas Whitmore. The sentence is death by hanging." A cheer erupted from the crowd, and Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing the words spoken aloud made her stomach lurch with terror. "I didn't kill him," she whispered, knowing her words would be lost in the crowd's roar. "God knows I didn't kill him." The hangman, Jeremiah Cook, adjusted the noose with practiced efficiency. His hands shook slightly. This was only his second execution, and the first had haunted his dreams. "Any last words, miss?" Sheriff Bradley asked. Sarah lifted her chin, forcing herself to look at the faces of people who had once greeted her warmly. "I forgive you all," she said, her voice steady, "and I pray that someday you'll learn the truth." This only angered the crowd further. Voices rose in indignation as Sheriff Bradley nodded to the hangman. Sarah closed her eyes and began to pray, the words of the Lord's Prayer tumbling from her lips like a lifeline. Then came the sound that would change everything. The steady clip-clop of horse hooves on packed earth, growing closer with each heartbeat. Jacob Thornfield had been watching from the hills above town, his weathered hands gripping the reins until his knuckles turned white. At 34, he was a man shaped by harsh frontier life, tall and broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and storm-gray eyes that had seen too much hardship. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples. He'd built his ranch from nothing, turning worthless land into one of the most successful cattle operations in 3 counties. But success had come at a price: isolation, loneliness, and a reputation for being a man of few words. As he rode closer, Jacob's jaw tightened with resolve. He had seen the fear in Sarah's eyes when they arrested her, had made his own quiet. Inquiries and what he'd learned convinced him that Cedar Ridge was about to hang an innocent woman. "Hold on there," Jacob called out, his deep voice cutting through the crowd's murmur as he brought his horse to a stop. He dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling softly. "Jacob Thornfield, what brings you to town?" Sheriff Bradley squinted, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Before you proceed, there's something that needs to be said," Jacob replied, removing his hat. His eyes found Sarah's face, noting the mixture of hope and confusion there. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward with obvious irritation. "Mr. Thornfield, this woman is a convicted murderer. We've had our trial and made our judgment." Jacob's gaze swept over the assembled townspeople. The evidence was circumstantial at best. Did anyone ask why Thomas Whitmore was in that boarding house at 11 o'clock at night? What business a married man had in a young seamstress's private quarters? Uncomfortable silence fell over the crowd. These were questions whispered in private but never spoken in court. The jury heard all the facts, Sheriff Bradley said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. "The jury heard what they wanted to hear," Jacob countered. "They heard that Thomas Whitmore was respected. They didn't hear about his debts, his drinking, or his reputation for forcing himself on defenseless women." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jacob's words struck a nerve, touching on rumors that had circulated for years but never been acknowledged. "You can't just make wild accusations against a dead man," called out Mayor Hutchins, I'm stating facts that should have been part of the trial, Jacob replied calmly. Facts showing Sarah Mitchell was defending herself against a man who broke into her room with violence on his mind. He stepped closer to the platform. But there's another fact that changes everything. He reached into his vest and withdrew a folded document. A marriage certificate filed with the territorial courthouse in Denver yesterday. The crowd erupted in confused chatter. According to territorial law, Jacob continued, a man has the right to claim his wife and protect her from legal proceedings that predate their union. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell is now Sarah Elizabeth Thornfield. The words hit like a physical blow. Women gasped while men shouted in outrage. That's impossible, Sheriff Bradley sputtered. You can't just marry a condemned woman. I can if the marriage is legal and binding, Jacob replied, producing another document. Which this one is. Witnessed, notarized, and filed with proper authorities. Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis. This stranger had somehow arranged their marriage and was risking everything to save her life. Jacob Thornfield, she whispered. Why? He looked up at her, and for a moment the chaotic scene faded away. Because everyone deserves a chance to tell their story, he said simply. And because I believe yours. Mayor Hutchins snatched the marriage documents from Jacob's hands, his face flushed with frustration. His fingers trembled as he examined the papers, looking for any flaw to dismiss this development that threatened to rob the town of its justice. This is outrageous, he muttered, adjusting his spectacles. There has to be some irregularity. The documents are legitimate, Jacob interrupted. Judge Morrison in Denver reviewed the case files and agreed that territorial law permits such unions under extraordinary circumstances. Sarah remained frozen on the platform, the noose still around, her neck hardly daring to breathe. The rope scratched against her skin, a constant reminder of how close she'd come to death. Dr. Edmund Carmichael stepped forward from the crowd. Mayor Hutchins, he said gravely, we cannot ignore territorial law. If the marriage is valid, then Mr. Thornfield has legal standing. But she's a murderer, shouted Mrs. Abernathy. Jacob turned to face the crowd. Sarah isn't a murderer. She's a victim who defended herself against a predator. The words sent a shock wave through the assembly. Thomas Whitmore's widow, Margaret, pushed through the crowd, her black mourning dress billowing around her thin frame. How dare you, she cried, pointing at Jacob. My husband was a good man. You have no right to sully his memory. Jacob's expression softened. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sorry for your loss. But your husband came to that boarding house uninvited, broke into Sarah's room through the window, intending to force himself upon her. She fought back with the only weapon available, a kitchen knife. Lies, Margaret screamed, but her voice cracked with uncertainty. Even if that's true, Sheriff Bradley said uncomfortably, the jury found her guilty, and territorial law states that a husband can protect his wife from proceedings that occurred before marriage, especially when new evidence suggests injustice, Jacob replied. He withdrew a thick envelope from his saddlebags. I've petitioned the territorial governor for a full review, presenting evidence never heard during the trial. What evidence? Mayor Hutchins demanded. Testimony from 3 other women assaulted, by Thomas Whitmore, who were too afraid to come forward. Medical evidence from Dr. Carmichael's files showing injuries consistent with sexual assault. Physical evidence from the boarding house overlooked by the investigation. Dr. Carmichael's face went pale. He remembered treating Sarah that night. Her torn dress, bruised face, blood under her fingernails. I did treat Miss Mitchell, he admitted reluctantly. She had defensive wounds, bruising consistent with struggle, and evidence of attempted assault. The admission hit like a thunderbolt. The righteous certainty driving their demand for execution began crumbling under uncomfortable truths. Margaret Whitmore collapsed to her knees, sobbing. No, it can't be true. He was your husband, and you loved him, Jacob said quietly. That doesn't make what he did right, but it doesn't make your grief less real. Sarah watched with relief and heartbreak as someone finally fought for her, this stranger who barely knew her name. Jacob, she called out softly. Why are you doing this? Looked up at her, their eyes meeting across the distance. Maybe I don't know you yet, he replied, but I know innocence when I see it. Everyone deserves a chance to start over. Sheriff Bradley looked around nervously, sensing the crowd's mood shifting from bloodthirsty certainty to doubt. This is interesting, he said, but we still have a legal execution order. Then you'll have to arrest me too, Jacob said calmly, because if you hang my wife, you'll be murdering an innocent woman, and I'll make sure everyone from here to Washington knows it. The threat hung in the air. Jacob Thornfield wasn't just any rancher. He was successful, with connections reaching far beyond Cedar Ridge. His word carried weight. Perhaps we could delay pending review, Mayor Hutchins suggested desperately. No, shouted voices from the crowd, but others began joining the opposition. Maybe we should hear these other women. If Dr. Carmichael says she was attacked. The crowd was fracturing, their unanimous condemnation splintering into doubt. Sarah felt hope kindle as she watched opinion slowly turn. Sheriff Bradley, Jacob said, I'm requesting you release my wife into my custody pending territorial investigation. I'll post bond and guarantee she won't leave my ranch without escort. The sheriff looked around helplessly, caught between competing pressures. The marriage documents appeared legitimate, the evidence was compelling, and the crowd was no longer unified. This is highly irregular, he muttered without conviction. So is hanging an innocent woman, Jacob replied firmly. The sun climbed higher as Sheriff Bradley finally climbed the gallows steps, each footstep echoing with the weight of his decision. In light of the complications that have arisen, he announced, his voice lacking earlier conviction, I'm ordering a temporary stay pending territorial review. Outrage erupted from portions of the crowd while others nodded grudgingly. The hangman visibly sagged with relief, stepping away from the lever. This is an outrage, shouted Ben Morrison the blacksmith. We followed the law, had a fair trial, and now fancy paperwork overturns a jury's verdict. The law's complex, Ben, Sheriff Bradley replied weakly. If there's a chance we got this wrong. With trembling fingers, he removed the noose from Sarah's neck. The coarse rope had left, red marks on her pale skin. Her legs nearly gave out and she gripped the wooden post to remain standing. Thank you, she whispered hoarsely. He avoided her eyes. Don't thank me yet. This is just delay, not acquittal. Jacob strode up the platform steps with purpose. Up. Close, Sarah could see worry lines around his storm-gray eyes, the tension in his jaw. Are you hurt? He asked quietly, his calloused fingers gently examining the rope burns. His touch was surprisingly gentle, the first kind physical contact she'd experienced in weeks. I'm alive, she replied barely above a whisper. Thanks to you. She searched his weathered face. But I don't understand why. Why sacrifice everything for someone you don't know? Jacob's hand stilled on her shoulders. Because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing against injustice. I've watched innocent folks get trampled by mobs in fear. I promised myself that if I ever had power to stop it, I would. Mayor Hutchins approached with the marriage documents, his political smile not reaching his eyes. Congratulations, though, under unusual circumstances. Nothing unusual about a man protecting his wife, Jacob replied evenly, helping Sarah down from the platform with steady hands. Of course. However, Mrs. Thornfield must remain under house arrest at your ranch pending investigation. Jacob nodded curtly. That was always the plan. As they moved toward Jacob's horse, Sarah caught sight of Margaret Whitmore collapsed in the dust, surrounded by comforting women. Sarah felt sympathy for the widow, understanding the agony of having your world shattered by unwanted truths. Without thinking, she approached the grieving woman and knelt beside her. Mrs. Whitmore, she said softly, I'm sorry. Sorry for your loss and sorry you learned the truth this way. Margaret looked up with red-rimmed eyes. You killed my husband, she whispered, but the words lacked venom. I defended myself against someone trying to hurt me, Sarah replied gently. But that doesn't make your grief less real. Whatever else he did, your love was real. The widow stared as if seeing her clearly for the first time, the woman she'd demanded be hanged, showing kindness in her darkest moment. Dr. Carmichael approached with his medical bag. "Mrs. Thornfield, I'd like to examine those rope burns. Make sure there's no lasting damage." As he tended her injuries, Sarah studied her unexpected husband fielding questions from townspeople with practiced patience. "He's a good man," Dr. Carmichael said quietly. "Keeps to himself but never turns away anyone needing help. Lost his first wife to fever 8 years ago. Been alone since." Sarah's heart clenched. Jacob was a widower living in solitude, and now he'd bound himself to a woman facing murder charges. "Keep those wounds clean," the doctor finished. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Thornfield. I should have spoken about your injuries during the trial. I was afraid of going against public opinion." "You're speaking now," Sarah smiled. "That's what matters." Jacob helped Sarah mount behind him on his black stallion. She'd never ridden double, and wrapping her arms around his waist felt both comforting and unsettling. "Hold tight," he advised. 2 hours to the ranch, and the trail can be rough." As they rode through town, Sarah was aware of eyes following them. Some showed curiosity, others hostility, a few sympathy. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house stepped onto her porch and waved support. "She believes me," Sarah murmured. "More people believe you than you think," Jacob replied, urging his horse into a canter. They just needed permission to admit it. Colorado landscape opened before them, rolling hills of autumn grass giving way to rougher terrain dotted with pine and aspen. Mountains rose majestically, their peaks touched with early snow catching. Sunlight like diamonds. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt she could breathe freely. The noose's weight was gone, replaced by unfamiliar but welcome hope. "Jacob," she said loudly over hoofbeats and wind. "What happens now? Between us? This marriage was to save my life, but what does it mean?" His shoulders tensed beneath her hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully measured. "It means whatever we decide," he said. "I didn't do this expecting anything from you. You're free to make choices about how to live, within staying out of jail constraints." "But we're married now," she persisted. "In law's eyes and God's eyes, what does that make us?" Jacob slowed his horse to a walk. "I suppose it makes us two people who'll figure out how to build a life together, one day at a time. I can't know what the future holds, but I promise you'll be safe on my ranch, treated with respect and have time to heal. And what about you? What do you get?" He was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice carried unexpected vulnerability. "Maybe I get a chance to remember what it's like having someone to care for again, someone to come home to. It's been long since. The ranch felt like more than just a place to work and sleep." The honest admission hung between them as they continued through Colorado wilderness. Two strangers bound by extraordinary circumstances, carrying fragile beginnings of something that might grow into something deeper than either dared hope. The Boo. Thornfield Ranch sprawled across a valley between pine-covered ridges, testament to one man's vision and years of labor. As they crested the final rise, Sarah caught her breath at the sight. The main house was substantial 2-story log construction with wraparound porch, surrounded by well-maintained outbuildings, speaking of earned prosperity. Cattle-dotted pastures, like specks against golden autumn grass, framed by mountains touching the sky. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, genuinely awed after weeks in cramped jail. "It's home," Jacob replied with quiet pride. "Building for 12 years since I claimed the land. Every building, most fence posts, I put up myself." A border collie ran to meet them, barking with excitement. Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in weeks as the animal bounded alongside. "That's Scout," Jacob explained, dismounting and helping her down. "Better company than most people. More trustworthy, too." Ranch hands emerged from barn and bunkhouse, weather-beaten men clearly respecting Jacob, but showing curiosity about the woman he'd brought home. "Men," Jacob said with natural authority, "meet my wife, Sarah. She'll be staying indefinitely, and I expect her treated with respect you'd show any lady." Charlie Brennan, the graying foreman, stepped forward, removing his hat. "Ma'am, welcome. to Thornfield Ranch. Thank you, Sarah replied, trying to project confidence. Jacob addressed concerns directly. You boys have heard stories from town. Sarah was wrongly accused and convicted. She's innocent, and anyone with problems can draw pay and move on. The declaration settled matters outwardly. Charlie nodded approvingly. Others dispersed to duties. Jacob led Sarah up porch steps, Scout trotting beside them. The oak front door was carved with intricate designs. As he opened it, Sarah stepped across the threshold into her new home. The interior was rustic yet refined. Wide plank floors with colorful rugs, furniture built to last. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall with leather chairs nearby. Bookshelves lined walls with well-worn volumes from practical manuals to literature and philosophy. You read, she observed, touching a Shakespeare volume. Long winter evenings need filling. Jacob smiled slightly. Books have been good company when human company was scarce. He led her upstairs past. This was meant to be a nursery someday, he said with obvious pain. It'll serve as your room. You'll have privacy, and there's a good lock if it makes you feel safer. The thoughtfulness and pain it cost him to offer the room representing his hopes for children moved Sarah deeply. That evening at dinner, Sarah was struck by how different this felt from boarding house meals. Jacob encouraged conversation, asking about her life, family, dreams. I grew up in Ohio, she found herself, saying over beef stew and bread he'd prepared. Father was a minister, mother took in sewing. I learned needlework from her, she was incredibly skilled. What brought you to Colorado? Sarah's expression grew somber. Both parents died of influenza 2 winters ago. I couldn't keep the house and there wasn't work for a single woman. I thought I could make a fresh start west, maybe open my own dressmaking shop. Instead, you ended up in Cedar Ridge. Mrs. Patterson was kind, gave me steady work and a place to sleep. I was saving money, hoping to rent a shop front in Denver, and then... She trailed off. Tell me what happened that night, Sarah. All of it. She looked up, startled. During her trial, no one wanted her version of events. You really want to know? I need to know. If we're going to fight this, clear your name completely. I need to understand exactly what happened. Sarah took a shaky breath, steeling herself to relive the nightmare. I was working on a dress, maybe 11 o'clock. I heard scratching at my window, but there was no wind. She paused, hands trembling as she reached for water. Jacob waited patiently. Thomas Whitmore was climbing through. He was drunk, eyes wild. I told him to leave, but he laughed, said he'd been watching me, that women like me, alone with no family, were fair game for men who knew how to take what they wanted. Jacob's hands clenched into fists, jaw muscle jumping with suppressed rage, but his voice remained calm. What happened next? I backed toward the door, but he was between me and the exit. I grabbed my kitchen knife from the sewing basket and warned him I'd defend myself. He smiled and said he liked women with spirit. She had to stop, the memory making her stomach churn. Jacob covered her hand with his, offering silent support. He lunged at me, grabbed my dress, tore it, tried to force me onto the bed. I fought back, scratching, biting, kicking. When he started hitting me to make me be still, I stabbed him with the knife. Once? 3 times, Sarah whispered. Once in the arm, once in the chest, then again when he kept coming. He fell backward, hit his head on my dresser corner. That's what killed him, the head injury. Jacob processed her account. The prosecution said you lured him there, that you were having an affair. A lie. I barely spoke to him except good morning at meals. But Mrs. Patterson said his wife was asking questions around town about where he spent evenings. I think he told her he was with me to deflect suspicion, or to set up defense if he got caught assaulting you, make it look like you were willing. Over following weeks, as autumn deepened into winter, Sarah gradually began feeling human again. Jacob kept his word. She was treated with respect, given useful work, slowly allowed to heal. She took over household duties with impressive efficiency. Her needlework skills proved invaluable, mending clothes, repairing canvas and leather, making new shirts for ranch hands tired of wearing more patch than original fabric. You don't have to work so hard, Jacob told her one evening. finding her still sewing by lamplight. "You're not a servant. You're my wife." "I need to feel useful," she replied without looking up from delicate embroidery. "I need to contribute something to earn my place." "You've already earned your place. Just by being here, making this house feel like home again, you've given me more than I could ask." She looked up, studying his face in golden lamplight. Over weeks together, she'd learned to read his emotions, eyes softening when pleased, tension around his mouth when worried, rare moments when his guarded expression gave way to contentment. "Is that what this is becoming?" she asked softly. "A real home? A real marriage?" The question hung heavy with implications neither had dared voice. They'd been living as polite strangers, careful not to overstep boundaries. Jacob leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. "I don't know what it's becoming, but I know it's something I haven't felt in a long time. Something I thought I'd lost the right to hope for." "And what's that?" "The feeling that tomorrow might be better than today, that there's someone who cares whether I make it home safe, that maybe God hasn't forgotten about me after all." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Jacob, I want you to know that whatever happens with legal proceedings, I'll always be grateful. Not just for saving my life, but for giving me back my worth, my hope." He touched her face gently, thumb brushing away an escaped tear. "Sarah, Sound of horses approaching at gallop interrupted him. Jacob was up instantly, hand moving to his gun belt, body tense with alertness. "Stay inside," he told Sarah, moving to the window. "Charlie, riders coming fast." Sarah's heart clenched with sudden fear. Had Cedar Ridge decided law was moving too, slowly? But as riders drew closer and house light illuminated faces, Jacob relaxed slightly. "Sheriff Bradley, and he's got someone with him. Official-looking fellow." "Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield," Sheriff Bradley called. "We need to speak with you. Both, it's important." The stranger was indeed official, thin, serious man in wool coat and bowler hat carrying himself with authority. "This is Judge Harrison from Territorial Courthouse in Denver," Sheriff Bradley explained uncomfortably. "He's been investigating irregularities in Mrs. Thornfield's case." Judge Harrison stepped forward, sharp eyes taking in the cozy domestic scene. "Mrs. Thornfield, I've spent 2 weeks interviewing witnesses, reviewing evidence, consulting legal experts about your case." Sarah's hands clenched together, knuckles white. This was the moment when her fate would be decided. After careful consideration, Judge Harrison continued, "Including testimony from 3 women reporting similar attacks by Thomas Whitmore, medical evidence confirming your injuries, and review of improperly handled physical evidence, I am prepared to issue official ruling." Complete silence filled the room. Jacob moved beside her, offering strength regardless of the judge's decision. "The original conviction is hereby overturned," Judge Harrison announced. "All charges against Sarah Elizabeth Thornfield are dropped. She is declared innocent. The death sentence is permanently voided." Sarah's legs gave out and she would have collapsed if Jacob hadn't caught her, pulling her against his chest as she sobbed with relief. The nightmare was finally over. Furthermore, the territorial government offers official apology for this miscarriage of justice. Thomas Whitmore has been posthumously identified as a sexual predator who terrorized women throughout the territory for years. After officials left with paperwork officially restoring Sarah's name, she and Jacob sat before their fire, processing the magnitude of what had occurred. "It's over," Sarah said wonderingly. "I'm truly free." "Yes," Jacob agreed, arm tightening around her shoulders. "You're free to go anywhere, do anything, start any life you choose." She heard something in his voice that might have been fear. Fear that her freedom meant leaving him. "Jacob Thornfield," she said softly, touching his face. "I've already chosen the life I want. I want to stay here with you and build something real together, not marriage born of desperation, but something based on choice, on caring, on the love that's been growing between us." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Sarah Thornfield," he said, using her married name like a benediction. "I've been falling in love with you since I saw you on that gallows, refusing to let them break your spirit. Would you marry me again? Not from necessity this time, but because we choose each other freely? Yes, she whispered, then louder with all the certainty her heart could hold. Yes, Jacob. I choose you. I choose us. I choose this life we're building, together. As he kissed her for the first time, with fire crackling beside them and vast Colorado sky stretching above their home, Sarah knew that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the darkest moments, and that hope, once kindled, burns brighter than any shadow that tries to extinguish it.